Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be exploring something I think a lot of us have thought about, which is, what would it really take to live off the grid? You know, not just the daydream, but the actual steps, the challenges, and maybe some of the unexpected rewards that come with making a change like that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic for sure. And luckily, we've got a great guy in Keroy King and her book, Letters to the Tribe. She's someone who actually walked this path. So we get real world insights, not just theories.
Right, and what I found interesting is that her journey was sparked by a book you might be familiar with, 4-Hour Workweek. It really made her rethink what freedom could actually look like.
Absolutely. And that book, it really tapped into this desire for more autonomy, more control over our own lives. And Miss King took that a step further and said, okay, how do I apply this to this off-grid living concept?
But off the grid can be kind of a broad term, right? I mean, it means different things to different people. But for Ms. King, it boiled down to 3 core freedoms: time, location, and cash flow. And she wanted to align all 3 of those with her personal purpose. And I think that resonates with a lot of people listening, right? I mean, who wouldn't want more control in those areas of their lives?
It's a very powerful idea. And Miss King is very upfront about the fact that this freedom does come with a price. She talks about, the mental toughness that's required.
Yeah.
The potential for loneliness, even pushback from loved ones who don't quite get it.
Yes. How does she navigate that? Especially when it feels like you're kind of going against the grain of, what society kind of expects of us.
She really stresses the importance of finding your WY. What is the driving force behind your desire for this type of lifestyle? And for her, it was about aligning those 3 freedoms: time, location, and cash flow. Aligning those with her purpose. And that WYY becomes your anchor when things get tough.
That makes total sense. You need a strong foundation for such a big shift. And speaking of foundation, she's very practical in her approach. She's like, you need a plan. Okay, so where are you going to live? How will you sustain yourself financially? Who will be your support system?
Those are all excellent questions. And it's fascinating because I've seen that reflected in the journeys of many people who have successfully transitioned to this lifestyle. It's not just about escaping, it's about intentionally building something new.
But I love how she talks about this transition period. She describes feeling like she found heaven on earth, but she also acknowledges the potential for loneliness. It's like you're in this amazing new space, but not everyone around you understands the shift that you've made.
Yeah, that disconnect can be really tough. And she had to really rely on that strong internal why to persevere, especially when she encountered resistance or skepticism from other people.
So it's not just about physical logistics. It's about emotional resilience as well. You have to be prepared for that internal battle as much as the external one.
Absolutely. And here's something Ms. King highlights that I think is crucial. Even when you achieve this off-grid freedom, you need to know your purpose. Otherwise, what happens when the initial excitement fades? What fills that space?
Because it's not just about escaping something. It's about intentionally moving towards something.
Right.
And she has this great example of giving up watching television years ago. And it wasn't just about freeing up time. It was about reducing negative input and creating space for more creativity. So what kind of habits might we need to examine if we were to truly pursue this lifestyle? What normal things might be holding us back?
It's a powerful question. And it ties directly into her rule of thumb, which I love. Everything you do should contribute to your overall goal. So there's a constant need to evaluate, to make choices, and sometimes to make sacrifices. What are you willing to give up in exchange for greater freedom?
That's where it gets really personal, right? It's about aligning your actions with your aspirations. And that's true whether you're living off the grid or not.
That's a great point, because at its core, this isn't just about changing your location or your energy source. It's about taking control of your life, your income, and ultimately your purpose.
Which leads perfectly to Mrs. King's recommendation of another great book called Start With Why. It really gets you thinking about those deeper motivations.
It's a must-read if you're even remotely considering this lifestyle shift, because as we've seen, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about crafting a life that truly aligns with your individual needs and desires.
So before we move on, let's take a moment to really ponder this. If you were to embark on this living off the grid journey, what would your WHY be?
Let that simmer for a bit, because in part 2, we'll delve deeper into the practicalities and challenges of this lifestyle. Stay tuned.
So I'm really curious to dig into some of those more practical aspects because it's easy to get swept up in the romantic vision of living off the grid, But Keroy King doesn't shy away from the nitty-gritty either.
Right, and that's what makes her story so valuable, I think. She paints a realistic picture, highlighting both the incredible highs and the very real challenges. She actually describes experiencing a profound improvement in her quality of life, a true sense of prosperity in mind, body, and soul.
Okay, that sounds pretty amazing.
Mm.
But she also talks about the potential for loneliness,
Yeah.
especially if your friends and family don't quite grasp what you're doing, why you're making this shift. So how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's a question that a lot of people grapple with. And she really emphasizes the importance of open communication, educating those who are genuinely curious. But she also learned the importance of setting boundaries. You can't force everyone to understand, and sometimes you have to accept that not everyone will.
Right. So it's about finding that balance, honoring your own path while maintaining those connections as best you can.
Exactly, and that takes us back to the strength of your WHY. Remember, Mrs. King encountered a lot of resistance, a lot of skepticism. Having that unwavering inner belief was essential for her to persevere.
Which makes me wonder, how do you cultivate that kind of unwavering belief? Is it something you're born with, or is it something that you can develop over time?
I think it's probably a bit of both. Some people are just naturally more inclined to trust their intuition and forge their own path. But for many of us, it's a muscle that needs to be exercised. It gets stronger through experience, through facing those challenges head on and realizing, hey, I got through that. I can handle this.
That makes sense. It's like any skill, the more you practice it, the more you hone that inner strength.
Yeah.
And Mrs. King talks about this process of personal growth being a key part of the living off the grid experience.
Yeah.
It's not just about changing your external circumstances. It's about internal transformation as well.
That's such an important point. It's about pushing your boundaries, getting comfortable with discomfort, and discovering new facets of yourself that you might not even known existed.
So it's almost like shedding those layers of conditioning, those expectations that society kind of places on us, and rediscovering that authentic self.
It really is. It's about embracing the unknown and trusting that you have the capacity to adapt and thrive, even amidst uncertainty.
And sometimes that means letting go of old habits and distractions to make room for something new, right? Like Ms. King giving up television years ago, she realized how much time and mental energy it was consuming and how it wasn't contributing to her overall goals.
Right. It's so easy to fall into those patterns, especially when it comes to, how we spend our time and consume information. Ms. King's story encourages us to step back and ask ourselves, okay, what am I feeding my mind? What habits are truly nourishing me and which ones are just holding me back?
Yeah, and that can be a really tough question to face, especially when we're so used to those habits. But it can be incredibly liberating to make those conscious choices to decide for ourselves what truly matters.
Absolutely. It's about taking ownership, not just of our physical environment, but of our mental and emotional landscape as well, shaping a life that aligns with our values, not the values that have been imposed upon us.
And that takes a lot of courage to break free from those expectations, the shoulds and have-tos that we've internalized over the years.
It does, but it's also incredibly empowering because you're defining success on your own terms. It's about reclaiming your time, your energy, and ultimately your purpose.
Which brings us back to that all-important why or why. It's like the anchor that keeps you grounded during those inevitable storms, the fuel that propels you forward when doubts start to creep in. And that's something we'll continue to explore as we move into the final part of this deep dive.
We'll dive into some more concrete examples from Mrs. King's experience and talk about specific steps you can take to start exploring this lifestyle, even in small ways. Stay with us.
It's inspiring to hear, how Keroy King found this level of freedom. But it also makes you realize it's an ongoing process, right? It's not just a destination you arrive at.
Yeah, that's such a key takeaway, I think. It's not about arriving at some perfect off-grid existence, but about, continually aligning your choices with your evolving needs and desires as you go.
And she makes this fascinating observation that once you have this freedom, knowing your purpose actually becomes even more crucial.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Without a clear direction, it's so easy to get lost in all the possibilities. You might even start to crave that structure and routine that you thought you were escaping.
It's funny because she talks about how, as humans, we're kind of wired for habit. And, we can find ourselves almost longing for things that weren't even good for us simply because they were familiar.
Oh, yeah, totally. It reminds me of, when I hear about like some addictive new TV show that everyone's raving about. And I'm like, oh, for a fleeting moment, I'm like, oh, maybe I should check that out. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I haven't watched TV in years. That old habit has lost its grip.
That's the exact example she uses. It's amazing how our desires can shift when we consciously change our habits and environment.
Totally. It's like upgrading to a whole new operating system. And once you've experienced that speed and efficiency of the new version, it's like you can't imagine going back to that old clunky one.
I love that analogy. And to make sure that upgrade is successful, Miss King has this like rule of thumb that she lives by. And she says, everything you do should intentionally contribute to your overall goal.
Right. It's about being ruthless with your time and energy. Not just decluttering your physical space, but decluttering your life commitments, habits, even those nagging thoughts that are holding you back.
So aligning your actions with your values, making those conscious choices that support the life you want to create.
Exactly. And sometimes that means making sacrifices right, letting go of things that no longer serve you, even if they're comfortable or familiar.
Yeah, it can be tough to say goodbye to those old comforts. But Mrs. King's experience shows us that the rewards can be well worth the effort.
Because in the end, it's about so much more than just living off the grid. It's about personal growth, self-discovery, stepping into your power.
It's about taking ownership of your life, your income, and your purpose.
Exactly. It's about designing a life that is authentically yours, filled with, intention and meaning.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into living off the grid, let's bring it back to you, the listener.
What would it look like for you to craft a life that truly reflects your values? What unique form would your off-grid journey take?
What small step can you take today to move just a little bit closer to that vision?
Keep seeking those answers. Keep diving deep and keep exploring what freedom means to you.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.